Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am delighted to be here with you this morning to discuss this important topic on auditing HR practices and improvement strategies. This is a very important topic because it helps us to have deep understanding of what the HR practices are with respect to the various functions of a HR manager. And it is important for us to evaluate or assess the current practices with a view to making improvements. There are three ways in which we can make improvements in the HR practices. Number one is to modify them so that they can be in tandem with the changes in our environment. Number two, we can change them by getting rid of those unnecessary and costly practices which may not be of help in our department. And then number three, we need to edit whichever practices that we have that may not be useful in our current work environment. So having said that, I want us to look at the content of our discussion today. There are 5 areas that we are going to look at in the HR practice and ways of improving our strategies. Number one is analyzing HR metrics. Metrics are measurements that help us to determine how successful our practices are in achieving the corporate objectives of our organizations. These metrics can either be quantitative or qualitative. They can be expressed in terms of frequencies or numbers, or in terms of percentages, or in terms of ratios. What we shall be doing in this area is to look at the various HR functions and how we can measure our success in performing those functions. Secondly, we shall be looking at benchmarking HR practices in our organizations. By benchmarking, we mean comparing what we do as HR managers with others in the industry. Why do we need to compare ourselves with others? Perhaps 2 main reasons. One is to identify best practices which we can borrow to improve our current HR practices. And secondly is to identify gaps between what others are doing and what we are doing. And when we do this, that is, borrow and identify gaps, we are able to improve our current HR systems so that we achieve our objectives. The third area we shall discuss is how to develop HR audit checklist. This checklist is a set of areas that we shall be doing auditing in. I can mention a few of them. Sorry. So though we are going to look at them in detail, number one is HR planning, which is actually the first function of HR manager. Two is recruitment and selection, which is about attracting and retaining talent. Three is training and development, which has to do with acquisition of new skills and knowledge to improve performance. And then number four is performance management, which is an area in which we are going to audit, whereby we are looking at how we set goals, how we track our performance, and how successful the performance has been based on the objectives that we set. Another area, which is part of the checklist, is compensation and the benefits. In this area, we shall be looking at our types of payment systems, how equitable they are, and how well they can be improved based on the benchmarks that we have already done. Then number four, as an area of interest in today's discussion, is how we can link our audit findings to HR improvements. We are going to look at the audit process, just like we looked at yesterday, and also try to look at the findings. Those are the results that we get from the HR audit, and try to link them to our corporate objectives. It is important for us to link these findings to corporate objectives for purposes of alignment. And that is the reason HR managers find their space in being partners of the organization in terms of strategy. That the findings will help us to justify our existence in the organization because of the value that we add. There are several values that we add. One is innovation. Two is service improvement. And three is contributing to the bottom line. Then lastly, another area that we shall look at is how to prioritize those areas that we have audited for purposes of improvement. When prioritizing, there are several considerations that we have to make. One is the impact. Areas that have the greatest impact on the organization are the ones that we are likely to prioritize. Secondly is feasibility. That is availability of resources to implement the areas that we have identified. And lastly, in terms of prioritization, is the relevance of the areas to the attainment of the corporate objectives. And that is how aligned are the strategies that we shall be proposing as a result of the HR audit to the corporate objectives. So those are the 5 areas that we are going to discuss in this topic. So we start with the first one, that is analyzing HR metrics. As I have indicated, metrics are measurements, which can be quantitative in terms of numbers, percentages, or ratios, or qualitative in terms of descriptions or opinions or discussions. There are quite a number of areas in which we can develop metrics in. I have given 4, but I can discuss more as we move on. So the first one is employee turnover rate. This metric measures workforce stability. By stability, I mean the time which employees take in organizations before leaving. If they take a long time before leaving, then the organization is stable. If they take a long time, it also means that service interruptions are a minimum. But if they exit very quickly, it causes instability. Going back to what we mentioned in terms of HR functions, and particularly recruitment and selection, we said that we recruit quality, talent, and retain them. Retention means that we have to keep this employee. But if they exit, then that means there is high turnover. So employee turnover may affect service delivery, may affect the reputation of the organization, and it may also affect the stability of our workforce. How do we calculate the turnover rate? There's a simple formula to this. That is to look at the number of people who have left over a period of time divided by the average number of people who are remaining. Average number. You multiply that by 100, you get your turnover rate. Why do we use an average in this turnover rate? It is for purposes of ensuring that we are accurate in our calculations. So the average is the total number of people at the beginning of that period, you minus the total number of people who are remaining. So that gives you an average. You divide that by 2. If you multiply that by 100, that is the people who are.
Sorry, Dr.
Yes.
Sorry, Dr. Come again on the formula of measuring the average rate.
Fine. I will state it again. That is the number of people who have left over or divided by the average number of employees who are remaining. Then you multiply that by 100. So again, how do you get the average number? Is you take the total number of employees at the beginning of that time. For example, from January to December this year, how many people did we have? And then you subtract the number of people who are remaining. Then you divide that result by 2, you will get the average number. So it is the number of people who have left over the average, you multiply by 100, that will give you a rate. I guess that is clear now?
Yes, that is in order. We can proceed.
Yes, thank you. When talking of turnover, depending on the industry, there are industries that have high rates of turnover, others have very low rates. For example, IT industries have very high rates of turnover compared to education sector, where turnover is fairly low. But according to industry standard, a turnover rate of less than 15% is good enough for an organization. But if it exceeds 15%, then means that there are many aspects that are sending the employees away, which we need to audit again. So we will also look at the retention rate. So the retention rate should be above 85 for us to be said that we are doing well in our HR practices. Then secondly is the absenteeism rate, which may give us indications of the degree to which employees are engaged in the organization. We all know that absenteeism is or rather it affects our performance, and we should not be encouraged. When people are absent for any reason, they affect performance. People are employed to attend work on a daily basis and on time. So being absent might mean that you are not at work either the whole day or part of the day. Others argue that even coming late is an indication of absenteeism because there is a number of minutes or hours that you are not at your workstation. Or leaving early before time, it means that you are absent for a period of time towards the end of the day. And this absenteeism can affect the motivation of others, which can also lead to poor performance. So how do we assess the absenteeism rate? Is that we count the number of days or hours that somebody has been absent over the total number of hours the employee was supposed to work, and then multiply that by 100. Siama, are we together? I believe so.
Come again on the formula. Go a bit slow on the formula so that I can capture the formula.
Okay. The total time or days a person is absent, you divide that by the total number of days the employee was supposed to be present, and then you multiply that by 100. So that will give you the absenteeism rate. I believe this is what you use in your organization, even in terms of payment. That when we are preparing our payroll, we look at the number of days that an employee has been absent. And then we deduct that from the total number of days that they were supposed to be paid, just to make sure that everybody is present and discourage absenteeism. So this is a measure of determining the rate of absenteeism in an organization. If absenteeism is very high, then there is every reason to get worried. You can imagine if more than half of the employees are absent for some reason, then that affects our performance. Of course, there are good reasons why some people are absent, and as a practice and the policy, they should be able to report to the relevant authorities that they will be absent. But those who are absent without any good excuse, then that can be treated as indiscipline, which may call for a disciplinary procedure if it's recurrent. Then the other aspect is the time to hire. This is the total number of days that it takes for an organization to hire new employees for various positions. Some organizations take a shorter time, depending on the nature of the job, and other organizations take longer. Especially in government institutions, because of the legal requirement that jobs have to be advertised, and then the hiring process begins through shortlisting, interviewing, and appointment. And there are stipulated number of days that an advertisement should run so that we attract as many people as possible. So how do we determine the total time taken to hire? Those of us who are using ATS, that is automated tracking system, it will tell us how long it took for a person to apply up to the time they were placed on the job. So how do we calculate the time to hire? We look at the total number of days taken to hire, say, 5 positions in our organization, 5 positions in our organization. And then how do you calculate that? So you take the number of days taken, like 120 days to hire people, over the number of jobs that were vacant. So if it took you 120 and there were 5 jobs, then you divide 120 by the 5 jobs, and it will give you an average of the time you took to hire those 5 people. And that comes approximately 22 days, if not 24. If you take a long time, then it means that the recruitment efficiency is very low. And if you take a very short time, there are chances of compromising quality. How? Because people might have not seen your advertisement to apply. So the time limit was short, and therefore you end up not getting the most qualified person from the job market. And again, if you take a very long time to hire, some of the potential candidates might have gone to other organizations because they can't wait forever. And that also affects the image of our organization in terms of branding. And that is the reason why we need to audit the time taken, 1, to promote our brand image, and 2, to promote or enhance operational efficiency. Because the more time we take, the more costly it becomes. And then another area of measuring performance is training effectiveness. This shows the results that are produced from a training intervention. Usually there are 4 areas of determining the effectiveness of a training process or program. Number 1 is the results. That after a training, an employee should produce desired results. The reason why we train is to ensure that employees improve their performance. So performance is measured by analyzing the results after the training process. What results do we expect here? These results are based on the training needs analysis or gaps. Number 1, improved time management. So if the training was intended to ensure that there is effective time management, so we should see improved time management. Secondly is attainment of targets. That if the employee before the training was not achieving their targets, then after the training, they should be able to achieve their targets. Another area of result is improved revenues. So if an employee is in a revenue center, then after the training, we should expect to see improved revenues. So that is one aspect where we are assessing the effectiveness of the training. And that aspect is results. So results can be in terms of 1, increased revenue, 2, improved time management, and 3, attainment of targets. So that is one area. Another area of assessing effectiveness is behavior. That training is important because it helps to change the behavior of people in a permanent way. So which behaviors are we expecting improvements in? Number 1 is teamwork. Number 2 is cooperation. Number 3 is participation in decision making or involvement. And perhaps number 4 is time management. So at the end of our training program, we should measure the behavior of employees because behaviors affect the performance of others. The third area of assessing training effectiveness is what we call reactions. These are the responses by the trainees in regard to the training itself, the training environment, and the content of the training. So when you are assessing reactions, there are several specific things that we can be looking for. 1, the relevance of the training content, meaning the content should be relevant to the trainee in order for them to improve their performance. 2 is the quality of the training. Was the training delivered in an interesting way? 3, is the trainees. Did the trainees deliver the training program as expected? Meaning that the trainers should be able to understand their content and cover the content within the given time. So we are giving reactions to the trainers. Were they qualified? They cover the whole content, or did they deliver the training in an interesting way? So those are three areas in which we can determine the training effectiveness. If I may repeat them, one is the results. Number two is behaviors. And number three is reactions. We can describe these reactions as a qualitative measure of determining the training effectiveness. So like I said before, not all areas can be measured quantitatively. Some are measured qualitatively, like the one that I have just mentioned. That is reaction. You cannot measure reaction quantitatively. You cannot measure behavior quantitatively. And you can also not measure effectiveness quantitatively. The other area in which we can measure performance is compensation competitiveness. Compensation is what our employees are paid at the end of the day, week, or month. This is usually in terms of salaries and wages. For those who are permanent and pensionable or on contract, they are paid salaries. And for those who are on short-time contracts, they are paid wages. So what are we going to measure in terms of our competitiveness in compensation? It is the salary structures and how they are implemented. Allow me to mention probably three areas in which we can measure compensation. Number one is equity. Equity is the fairness of payment when people compare their pay with others. So with us, we need to compare how fair our salaries and wages are when we compare them to those in the industry. Number two, another measure is salary differentials. What is the difference between the highest paid person in a lower grade and the highest paid person in a higher grade? Why are we interested in salary differentials? It is because they are used to attract people to an organization. And this is what some people use to exit organizations. That even in their current position, their wages are very low, and in the competitors' organization, their wages are high. So that difference may determine whether an employee stays or leaves. And because we want to be competitive, We want to ensure that the differentials are not very high. And then lastly, another measure of compensation is the market rates. What are we paying our employees compared to what others are paying in the same position or similar positions? So how do you do this? You look at what the current employees are paid in a particular grade, say grade D1. You compare grade D1 with grade D1 in another organization, and that will help us to determine whether we are paying at the market rate or above the market rate or below the market rate. We should be worried if our payment is below the market rate, because that is a recipe for losing our employees. And again, this largely depends on several things. One, ability to pay the market rates or above market rate. Two, bargaining power of employees or the union. Three, the level of revenues that you are generating. So it is important for us to compare what we are paying with what others are paying in the same industry. So benchmarking, as we shall see in the next few minutes, will help us to make comparisons between what we are paying and what others are paying in the industry in order to attract and retain talent. So basically, these are some of the areas in which we can measure our performance. They may be related to the various functions that we have mentioned before, like recruitment. In recruitment, the measure is time to hire or turnover rate. In training and development, we measure training effectiveness. In compensation and reward management, we do benchmarking with others in the industry. So having mentioned that benchmarking is very important, let us now look at benchmarking HR practices. As I've indicated, benchmarking is about comparing our policies, processes, and practices with industry leaders so that we can adopt the best practices. When we talk of industry leaders, these are organizations that are doing well or are successful. You can measure success in terms of 2 or 3 things. One is the profits and revenues they are posting, which means that the employees are working and delivering results. Number 2, we compare industry leaders in terms of quality of employees. What type of employees do they have in order to deliver results? And number 3 is the brand name. That is the image of the organization, which usually goes back to the practices that they have put in place in regard to human resources. And then you compare ourselves with those leaders and find out what is it that they are doing better than what we are doing. So if they are doing better in areas like recruitment, training, performance management, then we borrow those best practices. But again, before you implement those best practices, you need to customize them so that they can suit your work environment. The other aspect when we are talking about HR benchmarking is to look at the level of employee satisfaction and how we can achieve our strategic objectives. Why satisfaction? Because satisfied employees are productive. That is, they produce the desired results. So we do benchmarking because we want to borrow those best practices that can enhance our employees' levels of satisfaction. What are the types of benchmarking? Number one is internal benchmarking. This is where we are comparing our HR practices, processes, and even policies with other departments within the organization. Why do we need to compare ourselves with others internally? It is because there could be certain practices that other managers are using to make them successful. That when we do a comparison and a rating of the performance of different departments, perhaps we can say maybe the marketing department is doing better than the finance department, or ICT is doing better than HR. So when we compare ourselves with those other departments, we get to understand what they are doing in a better way than the HR department. So if it's about supervision, so we should inculcate effective supervision practices in the HR department. Or if it is teamwork, we need to also embrace teamwork in our HR department as a good practice. Or if it is innovation, other departments may be very innovative, but HR is not. So we compare ourselves with those other innovative departments and find out what makes them more innovative than us. So that is one type of benchmarking where we are comparing HR with other departments in terms of practices, processes, and policies. Secondly, we can do competitive benchmarking. This means that we compare ourselves directly with other players in the market. Allow me to use the telecommunication industry. There are two main players in the industry in Kenya: Safaricom and Airtel. So the two companies can compare their HR practices directly. Why? Because they are serving the same market and focusing on the same employees with a view to attracting and retaining them. So if Safaricom attracts more quality employees than Airtel, then that becomes an area of concern, which means that the managers of Airtel have to put in place mechanisms to attract better quality staff. Without these comparisons, there is a possibility of losing our staff to the competitors. And I'm sure some of us have experienced this, especially in the media industry, where top talent is poached from one station to another. And this affects their performance. So as a way of remaining competitive in the market, there is a need to do a benchmarking with those direct competitors so that we know exactly what they are doing, which we can also borrow from. Number 3 is functional benchmarking. And this relates to the various functions of HR that we undertake compared to other organizations in the industry. So specifically, we are looking at functions like human resource plan. How does it compare with others in the industry? 2, recruitment and selection. What are the practices to attract and retain talent? 3 is performance management. What are other organizations doing to manage employee performance effectively? For example, there are various methods of appraising people. Some use 360, others use self-appraisal, others use peer appraisal, and others also use customer appraisal. So when you compare yourself with others in terms of performance management, you may borrow those best practices. For example, 360-degree appraisal, so that we get feedback from multiple sources, which could be more objective than depending on only one method like self-appraisal, which is common in many organizations. Another area of functional benchmarking is training and development. As I will mention, today organizations have changed their approach to training, that they don't do mass training for their employees. What they do is to conduct targeted trainings. For example, people in HR department may have different needs. And those needs are the ones that we are going to target in conducting training. For instance, somebody might want to focus on learning and development only within the HR function. So we develop programs targeted at those employees who are interested in learning and development. Others could be interested in talent management. So we again train people specifically on talent management. So that is an example of functional benchmarking. For example, training, that you compare yourself with what others are doing and you find that they are doing targeted training. This is likely to produce better results than doing mass training. And then you can also do functional benchmarking in other areas like compensation, which we have mentioned, others like health and safety, and others like employee welfare. If I may talk briefly about employee welfare, that the well-being of an employee is very important. And one of the emerging trends today is focus on employees' mental health. because the environment in which we operate is very dynamic and requires quick responses, some people may become stressed. They become stressed, for example, because of home working, they feel lonely and stressed, or they have a lot of work to do because the workforce has reduced. So mental health has become a very important aspect in the management of people in organizations. And that mental health falls under employee relations and in some cases, health and safety. The employee health is very important. We do not want to have employees who are depressed in an organization. And by comparing this kind of programs with others in the industry, we are able to pick those best practices, like I have mentioned, mental health programs. Then the other type of benchmarking is strategic benchmarking, where we are comparing our HR practices with other organizations globally. I've used the word globally intentionally. Why? It is because today's organizations operate in a global market or environment. What do I mean by global? I mean that we are interconnected. That whatever happens elsewhere in the world affects us as organizations in general and as HR practitioners in particular. For example, we are talking about cultural diversity, that many organizations are culturally diverse. People come from different backgrounds, not only locally, but also internationally. So in international human resource management, you can recruit third country nationals, meaning that we can get expatriates from other countries to work in our various branches. For example, we open a branch in Sudan. We need employees to work there in Sudan. So as HR managers, what are the practices, global practices of hiring people? Either you hire from the local market, that is host country nationals. Two, you hire people from the parent country, or you hire people from third country nationals, that is people from outside Sudan. So we need to benchmark ourselves in terms of those HR practices, like international HR recruitment and selection. We can also benchmark our HR strategies in other areas like training. That today, we don't just train people for the local market. We can also train them for our international businesses. Especially now we have the East African community where goods and services can move across borders. We can train people to work in any of the East African countries. So those training require that we create awareness of other people's culture, either in the East African region or globally, and also create awareness on their performance and management practices. So why do we do this strategic benchmarking? It is because we want to improve our performance as an organization and also achieve long-term objectives, especially when we are talking of expansion into other areas or other countries. These are some of the key types of benchmarking. And now I want to invite Siama or anybody else who has a question to ask before I move to the next part. Siama, if you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Dr.
Yes,
I don't have a question now. I'm following keenly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I guess I'm understood on the types of benchmarking.
Very well, very well. That is very clear.
Thank you. Now I want to look at areas of benchmarking which I've already alluded to. Number one is recruitment and onboarding. Recruitment is a process of attracting potential and qualified staff to our organization. Depending on the stage of development your organization is, you will conduct this at any time. If you are a new organization, you start with recruitment. If you are an existing organization, you can attract new ones or promote existing ones. Either way, recruitment is an important exercise that we conduct in our organizations. It starts with the moment a position falls vacant. So what do we do when a position falls vacant? We conduct a job analysis, which will help us to develop job descriptions. And these job descriptions will help us to develop job specifications. And the job specifications will help in determining person specifications. The job descriptions will be used in advertising the vacant positions. So the moment you start identifying the gap or receiving requests for recruitment, then the process begins. So when we are benchmarking recruitment and onboarding, we go to the beginning, like we have said, the time taken to fill the vacant position. That is from the time the vacant position arose to the time the vacant position is filled and the employee is settled in the organization. So that time is critical because we are competitive. We want to be competitive in the market. So if the time is very long, we lose those potential candidates. And if it's too short, we might compromise on quality. And we have said it depends on the industry. Those of us in public sector, you might take longer because of the procedures involved. But those in the private sector, you can take between 30 and 45 days because you can use modern technology to attract and interview people and then place them on the job. The second aspect on recruitment is the quality of hire. Quality refers to several things. One is the results they produce. That when we hire people, we expect them to perform their tasks to the desired levels. So if a person is hired and cannot perform or cannot produce results, then that is a poor quality hire. Secondly, another aspect of quality of hire is the way they integrate themselves to the organization. If one of the requirements of the person is to be a team player, and after hiring, they don't seem to integrate into the teams, then that becomes a poor quality hire. So in terms of teamwork, this person does not fit into the organization. The other aspect of quality hire is the level of acceptance into the departments or sections to which they are placed. There are instances where new hires are rejected. They are rejected because of their behaviors, or they are rejected because of failure to meet their targets. So that means that the receiving section or department is unhappy with the new recruit. And that becomes a poor quality hire. And that is why we need to do an audit of the quality of people that we have hired. When you do recruitment and onboarding benchmarking, as we have said, you can do either internal benchmarking, competitive benchmarking, strategic benchmarking, or functional benchmarking. Whichever area of benchmarking, we need to look at the quality of people that we are hiring. So you benchmark what other organizations are doing to get that quality hire. Secondly, you look at employee engagement. This is the degree to which employees identify with and stay in the organization for a long time. So when we do benchmarking, we look at organizations in terms of the practices, processes, and policies that enable them to engage their employees. Why engagement? Because we don't want to lose our quality staff to the competitors. So how do we go about employee engagement benchmarking? We conduct surveys. These surveys are usually in the form of questionnaires. I remember we mentioned the methods of HR auditing, one of which is questionnaires. So you design a questionnaire that can be used to collect data from other organizations related to employee engagement. I've mentioned two areas there, job satisfaction and engagement. That we are going to look at the level of job satisfaction in either other departments, that is internally or externally, and what makes them happy. There could be several factors that make employees satisfied. One is the type of jobs they do. Even the name of the job can also affect the level of satisfaction, the title of the job. That's why organizations change the titles of their positions in order to attract employees. Or it could be the payment system. What are other organizations paying their employees compared to ours. That can lead to satisfaction. The other one is leadership and supervisory styles. What style of leadership is in place in our organization compared to those others which we are comparing with? The other aspect of satisfaction is working conditions and environment. So we need to benchmark the level of satisfaction and what causes this level of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. The other aspect we look at in employee engagement is the level of participation of employees in decision making. Participation. We can do a metric on employee participation rates. That is the number of employees who are actively participating over the number of employees who are in a forum. You multiply that by 100, then it can give you the rate of participation. I repeat.
Kindly, please repeat the formula.
Yes, the number of employees who are actively participating divided by the total number of employees, and then you multiply by 100. That will give you the participation rate. Ideally, if we are together, ideally, all employees are expected to participate in decision making. However, there are others who don't participate. And there are good reasons why they don't participate. One, it could be their ideas are not considered. Two, their ideas are not implemented. Three, they feel intimidated. Or four, they are not given an opportunity to participate. So those are the factors that can influence participation. So when we do a benchmark, we look at how others are doing to ensure that there are higher rates of participation. If there are low rates, then we don't receive new ideas or insights from employees. Perhaps I can ask a question. Siama, if you are there.
I'm here following keenly.
Yes. How do you ensure that introverts participate in decision making? Any idea?
I don't know if it is appropriate or if it works, but I'll just give an opinion, then you can advise me on that.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, because we have some introverts who, and generally introverts, they don't like talking in front of people.
Correct.
Yeah, so maybe engaging those individuals separate to get their opinion before proceeding. Maybe a one-on-one might help.
One-on-one away from the group.
Yes.
Okay.
One-on-one and taking notes in what the introvert's opinion is.
Yes. That's right. There are other ways in which you can encourage participation. The other one which I could suggest is to ask them to write their opinions or ideas and present them, to write them down. Number two is to ask them to write emails on what can be done, how, where, and by whom. And 3 is to provide them with the time. Some introverts take longer to process ideas, so give them time to construct the ideas and present them in the way they like. So again, look at what other organizations are doing to encourage participation of all people, whether they are extroverts or introverts. Sometimes extroverts dominate in meetings or in discussions, and that works to the disadvantage of introverts who are fairly reserved and don't want to talk. So to encourage them to participate, like you have said, have a one-on-one discussion away from others. 2, allow them to write their thoughts. And 3, give them time. Then another area of benchmarking is performance management. So what do we look for in performance management? One is the frequency and effectiveness of performance reviews. This again depends on your policy. Some organizations undertake their performance reviews quarterly. That is after every 3 months. Others half yearly, and others annually. I guess those of us who are working in private sector, this frequency can be reduced even to a week or a fortnight. But in the public sector, we always follow a financial calendar or a financial year, that the cycle begins in July of the year and ends at the end of June the following year. But for private sector, it can start at any time depending on their policy. It can start at the beginning of the year or after the first quarter or the third or fourth quarter. Why are we interested in the frequency in terms of benchmarking? It is because we want to borrow best practices. And if the number of performance reviews are higher in successful organizations, then that means that the frequency is an important factor in attaining success. But again, if we take too long to conduct these performance reviews, especially in an environment where we don't keep records, it becomes very difficult to appraise people accurately and objectively, because there are these biases that we have, especially when we rely on memory, that we can only rate people based on what they did in the recent past, say 1 month or 2 months ago. We can't remember anything that happened at the beginning of the year. Or others could be lost because of changes. Because if there are many changes in our environment, then we need also to rethink the frequency of our performance reviews. Because in some cases, you sit down with employees, set objectives and targets over a period of time, And as you start implementing, something else crops up. So do you stop the process or do you modify it in order to survive the new change? Secondly, we need to benchmark on the alignment of individual goals with those of organizational objectives. Individually, we have different goals that we want to achieve in an organization. For instance, some of us have the dream of becoming CEOs in our organizations. So if your objective is to become a CEO, then it should align with the objectives of your organization. So how is that? You ensure that you perform to the expected standards because that is what is expected of you. Two, you also ensure that you develop yourself. Develop yourself in the area in which you are working. And now that we are in HR, you develop yourself in HR by way of training or going for leadership courses. And why do you do this? You want to ensure that you achieve your targets, you achieve the organizational objectives. And if these objectives are aligned, then you are likely to be promoted to a higher level within your area. So you can grow from a HR officer to a HR manager, to a HR director, and then to a CEO. In that way, you will have aligned your goal with the organizational objectives. Then another area is compensation. We have talked about this, how competitive our salaries are compared to other players in the market in the same industry. The other aspect is equity. How fair is our system compared to the industry? Are we so low? Are we average? Or are we above market rates? Then the other aspect is transparency. Transparency in terms of being open in what we are paying our employees. That there could be a possibility that two or more people working in the same department at the same level, some of them are paid better than others. Although this may be determined by their performance and their experience, but assuming all of them have the same experience, have the same position, then it will not be fair for us to pay them differently. Unless somebody bargained better, but we should be guided by a policy. So in order to ensure that there is pay equity and transparency, we develop clear policy on compensation and benefits. And only those who merit are the ones who should be compensated better than others. Another area is learning and development, where we are talking about training hours per employee. And again, you can calculate this by looking at the total training hours over the term, the number of employees who have been trained. Then you can get the total number of hours. For example, I guess CMA in your organization, you have a training program. This training program identifies who is eligible for what training, the duration, and the budget. So talking of duration, we talk of different employees attending different trainings. So if you want to get the average time taken, you look at the total number of hours for all the employees who have been trained. You divide that by the total number of employees. I guess we are together, Siama?
Yes, we are.
Yes, total number of hours over total number of trainees. So it will give you an average time taken per employee. So if you want to convert that to percentage, you simply multiply that by 100. Then the second benchmark under learning and development is return on investment. That training is an investment. How is it an investment? It's because we expect the employees to produce results after the training program. So what results are we talking about here? I can mention 4. One is customer satisfaction. Number 2, cost reduction. Number 3, increased revenue. And number 4, for private organizations, profits. So we assess the returns we are getting from the training and the development intervention. So you compare this function with others in the market. How do they ensure that they get a return on their investment? Because the investment here is money. We are paying. As an organization, we pay for trainings, either locally or internationally. So when people are trained, we expect them to produce results like those ones that I've mentioned. Then the last element is diversity, equity, and inclusion, where diversity are the differences among employees. Equity is fairness in treatment, and inclusion is participation in decision making. So what are the metrics that we are looking at? Is the level of representation of different groups. For instance, in Kenya, the female gender has always been underrepresented in the past. But today we are happy that the number of women employees has increased, perhaps as a result of education, awareness, and also government policy, particularly on gender mainstreaming. So when we talk of representation, there must be a balance among employees in terms of 1, gender, male, female, or otherwise. 2, ethnic background, so that we don't have one community overrepresented and others underrepresented. 3, religious background. Though I'm aware that some organizations do not allow members who are not or do not belong to their religion. We respect them for that because they have their own cultural practices, which might be violated by allowing others to join. But there should be other considerations in order to ensure diversity and that also includes educational background. That the fact that all of us are from different educational backgrounds does not mean that we should not be included in decision making. Actually, what is happening in the industry today, many organizations are not focusing on degrees. They are focusing on diplomas. Why? Because these people are easy to train and they are practical oriented. So if you emphasize degrees, then you lose out on your potential candidates, especially those who have practical experience. And then the second one is inclusion index. Here we are looking at the different categories of employees and the degree to which they are represented in various decisions. For example, at board level, we expect that there should be the 2/3 gender representation, or 1/3, so that this group is not completely excluded from decision making. I am aware of some organizations that have boards consisting of men only. But in the public sector, this is illegal because it is a requirement that we have a balance in gender representation in those boards. At least 1 or 2, depending on the size of the board. So when we do benchmarking in terms of diversity and equity and inclusion, we are comparing ourselves with what other organizations are doing and how they are doing it. And then we borrow those best practices that we can implement in our own organizations. I believe I'm clear on that in terms of benchmarking areas. Now I want us to move to the next one in the interest of time. And this is process of benchmarking. It consists of about 7 steps. And these are the steps that I've enumerated there. Number 1 is identify objectives and scope of benchmarking. Allow me to say that we don't benchmark for fun. We want to benchmark in order to improve our processes, our policies, and our practices. So when you set out to do benchmarking, what should be on your mind is improvement. Improvement of those processes, policies, and practices, including culture. So one key objective is to improve HR policies, practices, and processes. Secondly, you also need to determine the scope. The scope are the areas that we are going to do benchmarking in, which we have just mentioned. So if you are going to do functional benchmarking, that will be your scope. You look at the functions like human resource planning, recruitment, training, performance, and the compensation. This will help us to focus on those particular areas. And again, we should be careful, because if the scope is too wide, then we end up not achieving our objectives. So let us have adequate areas that we want to benchmark in and focus on those one only. If resources are allowed, you may also do another benchmark so that you can also include other areas. But for us, we focus on the HR functions. Secondly, we identify the benchmarking partners. And again, this depends on which type of benchmarking we are undertaking. We have said that there are about 5 types of benchmarking. If I may go over them again: 1, internal benchmarking; 2, functional benchmarking; 3, competitive benchmarking; and 4, strategic benchmarking. So you need to find out which of the partners are you going to work with in all those areas. If it is functional benchmarking, you identify other organizations that have done well in those areas. And those are the industry leaders. When you benchmark, it is advisable that you do or select a representative number. Why? Because if you select one partner, then you have no basis to compare that partner with others. You need to identify 3, 4, or 5 other industry leaders so that you can identify the best practices that are common in all those companies. Otherwise, if you choose one, you may never know whether that is the only one that is doing the same thing. So select 3, 4, 5 partners, and that will give you an indication of the common best practices that are implemented in those organizations. And those are the ones that we can borrow because they have worked elsewhere. Number 3 is to identify the metrics and the data sources. We have just talked about metrics. These are measurements. And the data sources is what we are going to use to collect data from the different partners. So in terms of metrics, we have KPIs. These are key performance indicators. If I may use training and development as an example, we need to identify metrics that can be used to measure training and development. One of the KPIs is cost of training per employee. So how much does it cost to train one employee? And again, you look at the total cost of training, you divide that by the number of trainees. So that will give you an average cost. So that becomes a KPI. A second KPI in training is the hours taken or the time taken per employee. Another KPI is the budget that we set aside for employee training. So when you do benchmarking, you need to identify those specific and measurable areas that will give you a measure of why those successful organizations are succeeding. And then in terms of data sources, you have internal source and external source. If you do internal benchmarking, you will get data from different departments, including the HR department. And if you do external source, you do an external benchmark, either competitive benchmark or functional benchmark with other organizations out there. Why do we need to identify metrics? Because we want to get specific data that can help us to make those decisions. That without data, then it becomes difficult, one, to identify trends, and also two, to determine the relationship between the various factors affecting our performance, be it in recruitment, training, performance, and others. We must get a correlation, a relationship between the different factors that are affecting our performance. And that's why we need to be specific in determining these metrics. And those are the KPIs we are talking about. Step 4 is to collect and analyze data. There are various methods that we said that are used to collect data. Again, allow me to highlight or mention them. One is questionnaires. 2 is focus groups. 3 is interviews. 4 is observations. Those are the common methods of gathering data. So as you set out in this benchmarking exercise, you need to develop an appropriate tool that can be used to collect this data. And it is our responsibility as HR managers to task experts within our department to develop this tool. If we can't develop it ourselves, we ask the IT department. There is a way that they can develop a questionnaire which can be used online without necessarily visiting the organizations physically. So they can create an online questionnaire. In step 5, you develop action plans based on the data collected. When you collect data, you identify gaps, which are weaknesses, and identify opportunities. These opportunities become the areas of improvement. It could be in performance management. You have found out that the competitors are using 2 main methods because 360 can be very expensive. Probably they are using self-appraisal and vertical appraisal. By vertical appraisal, I mean managers appraise their employees and the employees appraise their managers in the spirit of transparency. So if you compare that with what you are doing in your organization, you may find that there is a gap. And you find also other gaps within the performance management system. Then you identify areas that you can prioritize. And again, as I will mention, priority will depend on several factors like impact That is the effect of the changes, and 2, the resources available. So if you are going to prioritize, look at the areas that need improvements immediately, and others can follow. And once you have developed those action plans, then the next step is to implement. And in implementation, you do 3 things. 1, you assign duties. 2, you allocate resources. And 3, you monitor progress. So when you assign duties, you know who is responsible for doing what. For example, you have identified that there is a gap in measuring training effectiveness. For example, you have not been looking at the change in behaviors. So you have to assign duties to a staff member who will be assessing the behaviors of people after training. If it's not one person, you can do it as a team. And I would always recommend team effort, where you address issues as a team, because as an individual, a person can be biased. So you can create a monitoring team to track the effectiveness of training, particularly in terms of behavior. And where there are gaps in the implementation, you make adjustments. Why? Because sometimes things don't go as we intended to. So if there are such deviations, we should make adjustments so that we remain on track. And that is why we need to continuously track progress to identify any emerging gaps. And then step last is evaluate and refine. I am sure we have implemented various initiatives in our organizations, and the HR audit is going to be another initiative. This process is said to be iterative. Iterative means that it has to be improved on a continuous basis. So you evaluate to determine success, refine to improve. That in any of the benchmarks that we have implemented, it could be in compensation. And under compensation and reward, we have identified a benefit. And such a benefit could be something like cafeteria benefits, where employees can choose from a menu of items a benefit that can be most suitable for them. So if this menu system has teething problems, then we evaluate and refine and see how best can we improve the menu reward system, because sometimes it can be abused. And again, if you allow people to choose 2 or more of those benefits, then it becomes expensive. And if that is the case, you now refine that benefit and say that employees can only choose one. If I may ask a question, Siama, the needs of our staff are diverse, and the kind of benefits that we offer appeal to different employees. which kind of benefit are you likely to offer the employees who belong to Gen Z? Siama?
I am there. I'm trying to wrap my head around the question.
Yeah, the question is that you are offering benefits to your employees, and there is a category of employees called Gen Zs. So what are the kinds of benefits are you likely to give them so that you either attract them or retain them? And
I'll go for bonuses.
Bonuses. Why a bonus?
Bonuses because something more on your salary will always make an impact, regardless of the generation.
Okay. Thank you. How about specific rewards that can appeal to Generation Z? Anything in mind? Okay, maybe I can help. There are several other benefits you can give. One is travel allowance. These young people like traveling a lot, and many of them would prefer using flights, either locally or internationally. So if you give the Gen Z a travel allowance, which can cover their air tickets so that they can post selfies as they travel, this could be a motivating factor to attract and retain them. Secondly, you can give them a reward or a benefit like top of the range telephones or computers. These young people like computers and others like telephones. So those good telephones that can be offered to them can be a source of inspiration for them to remain in the organization. And also you can allow them to work away from home or remote working, because these are not the 8 to 5 generation people, especially those of us who belong to the Generation X and the millennials. The young people want to remain at home and do their stuff. So you can allow them to work away from the office as a way of allowing them to flex their time. So what led me to this is where you are evaluating and refining those practices. And one of the practices is reward and compensation, where some of the rewards could be financial or non-financial. And you can give a cafeteria system. And if it's not working, you refine that. And then we look at the tools for benchmarking. We have said this, a survey is basically a questionnaire. But most important for us is industry reports. There are quite a number of organizations that conduct industry surveys so that we don't reinvent the wheel. And I've mentioned a number of them. One is FKE, that is Federation of Kenya Employers. They conduct regular surveys in various sectors related to the various functions of HR. It could be recruitment and selection, training and development, performance management. They have such reports. The other one is Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which keeps government data related to population, industries, and even industry reports, like the levels of unemployment or employment, redundancies, industries that are closing, and the reasons for that. So if we want to get reports about HR functions, we can go to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. The third one is our regulator, that is IHRM. They also conduct industry surveys to determine the level of compliance. And in some cases, they do visit our organizations to check on our systems to ensure that we are compliant with the various labor laws. The other organization is Deloitte and Touche. We know that this is a consultancy firm which does various consultancies, including HR, like recruitment, training, performance management, as well as salary surveys. So we can use these surveys as part of the resources for benchmarking. And the other organization, which is a global organization, the last two are global, McKinsey. It has offices here in Kenya. So we can get some of these resources from these organizations. And again, the process is you apply to them that you are seeking this kind of information, you get permission, and then they will allow you access to them. The other tool is HR software. We have various types of softwares, like the one I've mentioned there, that is the SAP, System Applications and Products, which is a very common tool or software that we can use to analyze the performance of the HR functions. Or Bamboo HR, this is another software which is used to conduct data analysis. I don't know, maybe for fun, I can ask Siama, which tool or software are you using in your organization?
Microsoft 365.
Okay, that is good. How well is it working?
It's working well, though we have to customize.
Mm-hmm.
We had to customize as per our specifications.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but for the accounts, they're using Sage.
Oh, Sage.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are various applications, and again, this depends on one, your need, and two, the resources available. Some are fairly expensive. So again, the organization might think that it's very expensive, and therefore might not be worth investing in it. So whichever tool that you are using, and as long as it's working for you, you can use it as a source of benchmarking. And especially yours, which you call Microsoft 365, can be used to benchmark internal benchmarking. And then you can also use other databases like Glassdoor and PayScale. These are all databases which you can obtain online. Some are free, others are paid for. But the one that is most common to us is LinkedIn. It's a professional database as well as social media where people can interact with other experts in industry. So through this LinkedIn space, I'm sure Siama, you have used or are in LinkedIn, and you interact with other experts in the market. You can get valuable insights. Yes. And that's how people also get jobs. I guess some of us use LinkedIn to prospect for new jobs and have put their profiles there, which are very beautiful. And as a HR manager, if you want to hire somebody, I could suggest that you try LinkedIn, because there are people with the wonderful profiles that we can get free of charge. You don't pay for them. So how has it worked for you, Siama, the LinkedIn space?
For me, I have ever used it for job applications.
Yes.
Yeah, for applying for jobs.
Okay.
Yeah, I find it detailed enough, and they're genuine.
Yes, there are no con men and women there.
Yes.
And also you can get insights on how to manage people in your organizations.
It's true. And other professionals also, they normally write some great articles there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
So
it's most of the people, they use it for knowledge sharing as well.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so those are the tools for benchmarking. How do we develop our HR audit? I said from the beginning that the audit checklist relates to the HR functions that we want to assess and how well they will be aligned with the organizational requirements. So these are the components. I don't want to repeat what we have done, but basically in recruitment, you look at the job descriptions and the hiring process, and then develop metrics from there. In employee records, you look at the type of records that you keep, either manual or electronic. But in terms of KPIs, you look at the accuracy and the compliance. And when you talk of records, you're talking about data. Data is a very important component, especially in Kenya today. A lack of compliance with the Data Protection Act can lead people into big trouble. There are many fines or huge fines that organizations can be imposed on, and that can be very expensive. So again, Siama and those of us who are listening, I will invite you to another program on 3rd to 7th on data protection laws in Kenya, in Naivasha. Then number 3 is performance management. Here we are looking at the processes and the systems that we use to manage people's performance. So again, we look at performance appraisal systems like self-appraisal, peer appraisal, 360, and others. Then the feedback mechanism, how do we inform employees how well or poorly are they doing? And again, in feedback, we are talking about either electronic feedback, and 2, the frequency of feedback, and 3, how we use this feedback to make improvements in performance. It is one thing to evaluate people, and it is also another to act on the feedback or results. So if there are any results obtained from performance management system, we should use that feedback either to train people where there are a lack of skills and knowledge, transfer people where the skills and knowledge are not aligned with the job, promote people, especially those who have stagnated, and also determine rewards. That is why we need to conduct appraisals, especially in an organization which uses PRP. PRP means performance-related pay. So we can use this feedback so that we can determine the pay system based on performance. And then number 4 is compensation and benefits. This is another key function in any organization. Though there are some organizations who are outsource payrolls, but if it is one of your core functions, you assess or audit the payroll system and how we administer our benefits system. Particularly, you look at the metrics like the salary levels, salary differentials, salary overlaps, and market rates. Then another component is training and development. You evaluate the effectiveness of the training and the development programs. And as we have indicated before, you look at several aspects. One, whether there is a training policy. Two, whether there is a clear training program. Three, whether there is a training budget. And four, whether we evaluate the effectiveness of our training. And then number last, this has to do with the labor laws, and that is compliance. HR managers ensure that all the HR activities comply with the law. And what do we look for in compliance? Number one is the existence of policies in various functions, starting from recruitment to training and others. So those policies is a compliance issue. Number two, offices that we create in order to enforce compliance. For instance, in data management under the Data Protection Act, you must have a compliance officer. This is an office which ensures compliance of our data and records with the Data Protection Act. Or in health and safety, we have audit committees, which consist of people who conduct health and safety audits and write reports. It is a legal requirement that we have some of these offices to ensure that we are compliant. Moving forward, how do we link HR audit to improvements? HR audit findings are the results that we obtain from this process. These results may indicate opportunities, gaps, or risks. The opportunities are areas that we can take advantage of to improve. It's not that you have a gap, no, but it's a new area that you may want to explore, either to improve the performance of individual employees, or you want to improve the performance of the whole department. For instance, the use of AI. Probably you are using a lower version of AI. Then you find that other organizations are using superior AIs. That does not mean that you are not competitive. It means that there is an opportunity for you to improve your AI system. And when you talk of gaps, these are areas of weakness. For example, in IT, you don't have a human resource information system, which means that you rely on manual systems. That is a big gap that should worry everybody. And then when you talk of risks, which we mentioned yesterday, these are internal and external factors that can cause business failure, such as financial risks, operational risks, environmental risks, strategic risks, or even legal or compliance risks. So the audit findings will identify those 3 key areas. 1, opportunities. 2, gaps. And 3, risks. So why do we conduct this HR audit? Like we said yesterday, the findings should be aligned with the corporate objectives. So the purpose of linking HR audit to improvements is to drive targeted actions to address issues. I have already mentioned that our audit, our benchmarking should be targeted. For instance, we may target to improve our recruitment and selection processes. So if we have been experiencing delays or experiencing high costs or having low quality employees, this HR audit will target those gaps with a view to improving. So the key word here we are emphasizing is improvement. There are many benefits of linking HR findings to improvements. Even at the risk of repetition or repeating myself, there is 1, compliance, because if we don't comply, there are penalties. 2, efficiency, that means to optimize cost or resource utilization. And 3, employee satisfaction. Why employee satisfaction? Because a dissatisfied employee is likely to leave, and that becomes a risk. Loss of talent is a risk because it affects our performance as HR department and as an organization in general. What is the process? Is analyze finding, prioritize, and develop action plans, which I had mentioned earlier in the process of HR benchmarking. And that means that when we want to link our findings to improvements, we must analyze the findings either quantitatively or qualitatively to identify those opportunities, gaps, and risks, and then prioritize. What are the actions that we can take right now in order to improve? Then lastly, what are the outcomes? That at the end of this process, we need those outcomes. What are the improvements that we can make, which are measurable? So we can make improvements in all the areas that we have identified, be they recruitment and selection practices, training, performance management, as well as reward and benefits. What are the tools of linking findings to improvements? I've mentioned the 5. 1 is the SWOT analysis, and I'm sure we are aware that this is derived from environmental analysis. There are 2 environments we are talking about here. 1, internal environment, and 2, external environment. The internal environment will help us to identify our strengths and weaknesses. Strengths in all the areas, as well as weaknesses in all the areas that we are auditing. And externally, we can identify opportunities. We can use our internal strengths to take advantage of those opportunities. If I may take us back to the example I mentioned, that one of AI. And I said that we may be using AI at the moment, which is a strength. But externally, you find that there are other versions of AI which we can use to improve the HR functions. So what we do, we use the employees with the AI skills and knowledge, train them so that they can use the new versions of AI which are in the market. And that is one way of linking performance to improvements. That yes, you are using AI to perform, but you can use better AI versions to improve your performance. Then in terms of threats, these are external factors, which are usually acronymed as PESTEL: political, economic, social, technological, ecological, and legal. And we can use an example of a threat, an external threat. This is economic decline, not just in Kenya, but elsewhere in the world. When an economy is declining, it means almost everything in an organization is also declining. One, the revenues are declining. Two, profits are declining. Three, market share is declining. Four, customer base is declining. And what does that imply to an organization? That we must tighten our belts. And how do we do that? We identify areas in which we can cut costs. So we look at our numbers in the human resource plan. If the human resource plan proposes recruitment of new staff, you put that on ice. That means you freeze because the economy is threatening. Two, if there are any high-level trainings that you intended, again, you scale down on those trainings. Or if the workforce is bloated, that means that we have excess workforce which we can't pay and the economy cannot allow, we retrench. So that is a tool that is used to formulate different strategies within HR for purposes of improvement. We also talked about SMART goals, specific referring to a particular element or aspect of HR. For example, in recruitment, we might focus on onboarding. Probably that is where there were gaps. And we started onboarding when employees reported. So in onboarding, as a specific objective, is to start our onboarding process 2 weeks before the employee reports. That's a specific aspect. Specific in the sense that it is related to something particular. And then it is measurable because we have indicated 2 weeks that we can measure onboarding in terms of weeks. Then attainable, is onboarding attainable in terms of the 2 weeks? Yes. Is it realistic considering the resources? Yes. Is it time bound? Yes. So that is how we use the SMART goals to link the findings to improvements. HR analytics is basically about identifying trends and progress with the use of data. We analyze data and identify trends. Trends are patterns. For example, today, we are witnessing a change or a pattern in the way in which we conduct our business as HR managers. So one of the trends that is emerging is the use of ATS in recruitment and selection, automated tracking system. So you compare this with other organizations, you find that almost all organizations are using this. So based on this data, you can see where the world is going. The second analytic, which is data-based, is the use of AI, artificial intelligence. So that means that we must develop agile systems to ensure that we adapt to these trends. Other organizations use dashboards. These are systems into which employees can feed data in real time, either to make a suggestion to improve or share an idea or even communicate areas of weakness. The system is real time because in today's organizations, we don't have the luxury of time to wait for things to happen. So if Siama, you have a dashboard, whatever you do in HR should be seen by everybody in your department or other departments at the time you are doing that. That is in real time. So if there is a disciplinary process report, it should be fed into the system in real time. Once it's completed, it is fed into the system. Or if there is any change in the human resource activities, like reporting time, probably you are changing from 8:30 to 8. So that should be posted on the dashboard in real time. Then lastly, we have feedback loops where our systems, be they dashboards or ERPs, enterprise resource planning systems, we should be able to get feedback from them. And this is what we act on regarding how well or poorly we are doing. I'm not sure whether anybody has a question related to the tools that I have mentioned before I move on to the next slide. Any question or a comment? Siama?
Thank you very much. Mine is just to praise you, Mwalimu. Thank you very much. You're articulating your points very well.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm grasping everything you say. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's move to prioritization for purposes of improvement. And prioritizing basically means that we identify aspects in the human resource audit that should be implemented in a particular order. So the ones that are very important are prioritized. Those that are not very important are put on the waiting list. And those that are not important at all they are discarded. So we can talk about prioritization in terms of 6 key elements, and that is what makes them important. That anything that we want to introduce is important because of the 6 key points that we have identified there. One is the impact. I want to pick any of the HR functions at random and talk about impact. Health and safety is one of the functions of HR, though it's a cross-cutting function. We have identified that our health and safety systems may not be working. For example, those of us who have lifts in our buildings, the lifts are not working. Or if they work randomly. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. This becomes a significant safety issue because you can imagine several of your employees are in the lift and the lift decides to give way from 14th floor to ground floor. That can be very scary. So when we do our HR audit in health and safety, we look at all the systems, lifts, hoists, and any movable items. Because of its significance, we prioritize the repairs or a change of the lift. Why? Because of the impact that can create. You can imagine losing 10 employees in a lift or in an accident. I believe some of us have shared experiences on employees traveling in the same bus and they have an accident, God forbid, and you lose a number of them. That becomes a risk. So as HR managers, we need to identify areas such as health and safety and look at the impact. How significant is the issue to the survival of the organization in general and the HR department in particular? So the impacts can be both negative and positive. If it's a negative impact, we take immediate actions because we are likely to lose. What do we lose? We lose employees, we lose money, or we can even lose a building or damage to company property. And if it is positive, we need to take advantage of it because that is an opportunity. So the impact, for example, of use of technology is huge because it will help us, one, reduce the time for service delivery in a big way. Two, reduce on cost. And three, increase our revenues. So if the percentage of the revenues and profit is huge because of the areas that we are targeting, then that becomes first priority. Number second is urgency. The question you will ask yourself, what will happen if a gap is not resolved or an opportunity is not taken advantage of. So if it's an opportunity that we want to take advantage of before the competitors take it, it becomes urgent, as in it should be done right now. There's no waiting time. For instance, an organization develops a new product in the market and it does not protect it in terms of copyrights. The competitors take it up very quickly and then make profits. We will have lost the market because we didn't take advantage of that innovation. So if there's a new innovation in the market which can change or cause a big impact in the organization, that becomes urgent. But there's no waiting time, you have to implement it. If I may give another example in recruitment, in recruitment and selection, we recruit people. And then suddenly all of them leave the organization. That becomes a crisis. And that crisis requires quick or immediate attention. The other reason for prioritization is practicality. That is feasibility. How practicable is it to implement the recommendation from HR audit? So what will determine the practicality of a recommendation is the resources available. If finances are not available, then it's not practical. If human resources are not available, it's not practicable. Or if technology is not available, then that recommendation fails. Then another criterion for prioritization is alignment. We always ask ourselves whether what we are doing is helping the organization to achieve its mission, vision, and objectives. So if we are doing any of the functions like recruitment training, they all must be aligned to the organizational goals. And I want to give an example of alignment. Suppose an organization wants to increase its customer base by 20% by the end of the year 2025. Increasing the customer base by 20% at the end of this year. As HR managers, this one should be cascaded to us, that we want to increase our customer base. So HR managers ask ourselves, what do we need to do in order to achieve that goal? We can do several things. One, we train our employees so that they have the relevant skills and knowledge that can be used to deliver services so that customers can be delighted. Number two, we can ensure that employees perform at the required levels in terms of performance appraisal and management so that they deliver superior services and that can attract customers. Four, we can reward our employees to motivate them. And a motivated workforce is a performing workforce. And through that performance, we are able to achieve the 20% customer base by the end of this year. So that is in terms of alignment. The other one is stakeholder input. We talked about stakeholders yesterday, and we mentioned quite a number of them. Leaders, managers, internal customers, and external stakeholders, such as government. So we prioritize those areas we have selected because we want to satisfy the needs of our stakeholders. For instance, the leaders of our organization need to be in the picture from the beginning of this HR audit process, so that one, we get their blessings. Two, we get their support in terms of resource allocation and their own personal time. And five, we align with their strategies and policies. So stakeholder input is very important so that we can prioritize those areas of improvement. And lastly, we do a cost-benefit analysis. What are the returns we are going to get from the improvements that we are going to make? If the returns are very low and the cost is very high, then there's no need of undertaking that exercise. But if the returns are very high, it also means that we are going to benefit as an organization. Moving on, what are the steps that we can use in prioritizing those areas? One, list the issues. I want to believe that by the end of this HR audit, you will have identified areas where there are opportunities, where there are gaps, and where there are risks. So list all those areas, all of them in no particular order. And then secondly, assess each area based on the criteria for prioritization. And that is what I've mentioned there, a few of them: impact, urgency, and feasibility. So what is the impact of each of those items? What is the urgency? And how practical is it? Then based on this evaluation, you rank them from the highest to the lowest. The one that is ranked highly, maybe you can use a points rating where you give points. For example, 1 to 5, where 5 means very high and 1 very low. Those that are ranked highly based on impact and urgency, they are the ones now to prioritize. And once you have prioritized, the next step is to develop implementation plans so that those that are key are done first, and those that can wait are put on the waiting list. Then from there, you assign responsibilities. Like I said, this is an implementation issue. Identify teams or individuals to implement those issues and ensure that we monitor progress on a regular basis to ensure that there are improvements, or if there are not, we make adjustments as and when they are needed. As we wind up, I want us to look at the strategies that we can use based on the HR audit findings. What are the strategies that we can use to make improvements? And I will mention a few of them, like I have indicated on that slide. One is policy enhancement. I am sure all of us are aware that policy is what drives the activities in all organizations. The Human Resource Department is guided by policy. All the functions are guided by policy. There's none of them that does not have a policy. For example, recruitment and selection, there is a policy to that effect, which must be aligned with the Employment Act and other legislations. Secondly, we have training and development policy, which talks about training needs analysis, allocation of budget, evaluating training effectiveness, among others. The other policy area is performance management. So this policy will give the scope, will give the objectives, will give the methods of performance management, the use of feedback, and any other aspect that you may want to include in it. So when you have done your HR audit and you have identified opportunities, gaps, and risks, then you enhance your policies, update those policies based on the opportunities, gaps, and risks you have identified. Number two, where there are talent gaps, you ensure that you bring them on board. So if there was a problem with acquiring the right quality of employees, then you should restructure your processes so that you get the right quality of employees, especially at the time of vetting. Vetting starts at the point of shortlisting. When you receive applications, you shortlist. So how do you shortlist and who do you shortlist? There are chances that you might shortlist people who have no qualifications, either through acts of omission or commission. So in terms of talent gaps, we need to look at how we can structure our hiring procedures, how we can promote employer branding. By employer branding, we mean that we promote the image of the organization at all times. And one of the ways of doing this from a HR perspective is to ensure our practices are fair and equitable so that we can attract those high quality employees, including the advertisements we place, the interviews we conduct, the onboarding, and even the final aspect, which is probation, that will promote employer branding. And lastly, we look at AI tools, which I've already mentioned, that today AI is a game changer, and therefore we need to embrace these tools in order to, one, recruit quality employees and undertake the process in an efficient and effective way. Two, train employees using these AI tools. Three, conduct performance appraisals 4, conduct surveys in compensation and benefits, among other things. So the use of AI tools is unlimited. It is for us to embrace this and also to enable us to make our systems agile. Agile in the sense that they are adaptable to changes in the environment. So our recruitment must be agile, training must be agile, appraisals must be agile, and also reward management systems must be agile. The third strategy is employee retention. And how do we retain employees? There are several mechanisms that we use. 1, train them. 2, develop careers. 2, develop recognition systems. 3, develop a conducive work environment. And 4, employee participation and involvement. Number 4 is compensation and benefits upgrades. That when you have done your benchmarking, especially with those industry leaders, you may have to adjust your pay systems so that your employees are motivated and are able to produce desirable results. The third last strategy is training and development. And I said that today we are developing targeted learning for our employees, that we identify specific training needs and tailor-make our programs for those particular employees, so that 1, we don't waste money on programs that are not relevant to them. 2, we don't waste time allowing employees to attend training needs, rather training programs that don't add value. And 3, developing training programs that are not motivating. So targeted learning is what is now emerging as a new trend in training and development. Then the other strategy is to change or improve our performance management system. I'm sure all of us have been doing this by way of setting those clear goals, developing adequate feedback systems, and also linking performance to reward. Though in some cases this is discouraged. Why? Because not every function can be measured quantitatively. For example, a person keeping the gate, his or her performance may not be measured quantitatively, but is more qualitative. How do we do that? Maybe we develop a tool to assess the level of satisfaction with the person at the gate, either in terms of friendliness, in terms of punctuality, in terms of resolving problems before they get into the organization, or the way they relate with the employees. So we can develop new ways of evaluating employees and not just stick to the traditional quantitative methods, which may not apply to all areas. And then the very last strategy is to integrate technology into our HR functions. I have already mentioned that, and one of which is the use of AI. The other one is the use of technological tools, like what Siama mentioned. They use Microsoft 365. I guess 365 relates to the days of the year, and therefore it serves you 365 days a year, non-stop. So automating processes like recruitment, training, performance management will go a long way in achieving three key things. One, reducing time taken. Two, reducing costs. And three, improving overall organizational performance. So with that, we come to the end of our presentation. And now it is time for us to ask questions, give our comments, and if there are any complaints, please do. The floor is yours for questions and answers. Siama, if you can hear me?
Very well, I can hear you.
Yes. Any question that you may have? Any comment before we close the session?
I have one. Are we
Yes,
going
Hannah.
to get the slides? Are we going to get the slides?
You will get, thank you, Hannah, and welcome to the training. I'm happy to have you on board, and I hope to see you again tomorrow. To answer your question, yes, you will have the notes online, not physically, but once you finish the course, these notes will be posted on our website.
Thank you. Asante sana mwalimu. Very interesting topic. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I'm happy that you have been listening. So if there is no further question.
Yes, Mwalimu, I have a question.
Yes.
Could we please have your email address just in case we want to follow up on some of these issues as we implement them? Thank you. My name's Alois.
Lois, thank you for coming and attending this training. And again, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Yes, we have our website and telephone numbers, which are indicated on our website, as well as email, which you can use to ask any queries and any assistance that you may need. So please visit our website and all the information is there.
Mine is to thank you, Mwalimu.
Thank you.
Yes, I really appreciate the way you articulate, the way you explain your points. I mean, it's just hard to forget.
Oh,
I appreciate. Thank you very much.
I'm humbled. Okay, then thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Have a good afternoon yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.